Today we have a guest, Dr. Gabrielle Jones, who will be helping to undercomplicate the topic of substance use. Welcome to Undercomplicating Stuff, where we, two psychologists and coaches with over 40 years of combined experience, share our insights to help undercomplicate important topics. A friendly reminder that this video is meant for conversational and entertainment purposes only. Please see the information section of this video for additional resources. So I'm Dr. Julie Radico. I am a psychologist, a coach, an author, and a speaker, and I'm here with Dr. Stacey Gedian.
Thanks, Julie. I'm Stacey Gedian. I'm a health psychologist and the founder and CEO of a healthcare consulting and professional coaching business. And I'm going to ask Dr. Jones to introduce herself.
My name is Dr. Gabrielle Jones. I'm a licensed psychologist, CEO, and founder of Steady LLC, award-winning author and speaker, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to learning a lot from you today and really wanting to start it off with what would you say is maybe the biggest or one of the biggest misconceptions about substance use treatment?
I think the biggest misconception about substance use treatment is that it is a one size fits all. It's often an afterthought when you're building out treatment programs or in addition to. And often there is one in particular approach that is embedded in the treatment process. I think it's important to highlight that we are all unique and we're all different. And in saying that, I also want to just highlight the fact that this topic is, though we're undercomplicating it, it is very nuanced. And oftentimes people are looking for the right answer. And especially when we're talking about substance use in this forum, it's important to know that this answer may be the right answer for one person and not the right answer for another. So to just be careful, because it's already such an over stigmatized topic. And I'm excited to be able to hopefully destigmatize it a little bit from this interview, but it's definitely something to keep in mind for our listeners out there.
I think it's such an important point that you bring up, Gabrielle, that it's a topic that is really nuanced and complex. So even as we start asking you questions about this to help undercomplicate it, there's a ton of people listening that might have so many different and nuanced experiences with this, or if they're hearing a potential story about something that was helpful for somebody, that they might be like, well, that's not what worked for my loved one, or that wouldn't work for me, or you don't understand this nuance of how I'm coming at this. And I think that as for all of us as psychologists, we want to make space for that. And that's true. And along with that, wanting to really talk about this topic, because there's so much really important information that I know you've written about and you speak about that I think could be so helpful for our listeners to add skills to their toolbox to figure out what is the right direction for them. So thinking about that, what are the biggest myths or like traps that you feel like people fall into when they start thinking about what substance use is?
I love this question. And I want to start with the stigma. So in my book, I speak a little bit about substance use stigma. So not just substance use treatment stigma, but the substances themselves. And what I say is every substance that impairs your ability to function in some way, whether it is something productive or unproductive, is a substance. And so we have to get out of, in order to destigmatize and undercomplicate it, we really need to level set substances. So what I mean by that is cocaine is no more or less of a substance than caffeine. Sugar is no more or less of a substance than heroin. They're all substances. Cannabis is no more or less a substance than ayahuasca or other plant medicines that are being used for various purposes. And Tylenol is no more or less a substance than opioids. So our profession, a lot of the communities that we serve, as well as those who are in treatment or considering treatment, feel like they're being judged and like they can't receive the services that they need. We have GLP-1s flying off the shelf for diabetes. Well, what raises A1C? What impacts glucose? Sugar, sweets, animal fats, all of these things that we consume on a regular basis adjust our diet, adjust our bodies, and they contribute to us needing medications for one reason or another. But because of society, we have categorized substances to be more or less taboo. So that's not to say that one doesn't have a more immediate negative impact than another does, but the taboo around them is really the the myth is that one is better or worse than the other. And I think my biggest goal in the work that I do is to destigmatize substance use and substance use treatment so that everyone can get the care that they need without feeling like it is a moral issue.
I'm so glad that we're talking about the stigma associated with it. And we've talked about stigma with mental health disorders in general, and substance use still, I think, is such a long way behind other things that we're having to help folks with or wanting to help folks with. So I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Do you think that there are certain people, situations, instances that may contribute to somebody being more prone to struggling with any sort of substance use?
Absolutely. And there is a wealth of research that supports the biopsychosocial model of addiction. There are biological components and indicators that put people at higher risk. What I want to say that we don't consider and that gets missed or overemphasized when we're talking about the biological component is that it's a load. It doesn't mean that someone is going to develop a substance use disorder so much so as it means that they're at a higher risk of developing an addiction or a substance use disorder due to some of the genetic factors that are within them. So, just as much as I might be more likely to develop cataracts because that runs in my family, it's no different from substance use. Like I could develop it, but I could not. That's not saying that I will. And I think people often overemphasize and overutilize the idea that there is a biological component to substance use disorders, and that is the reason. So there's no going back, and there's no way to address it effectively and comprehensively.
So, as psychologists, we hear a lot of people who talk about like the genetic predisposition to something, that you might be more predisposed to have some sort of diagnosis because somebody in your family has that. And I think it's so powerful that you talk about here that you don't have to resign yourself to a script that you're going to not be able to navigate or figure out how to keep yourself healthy, any sort of situation, just because there might be some sort of like biological piece there.
I like to use this example. I worked when I was doing more direct care. My primary subspecialty was with adolescents. So I really got used to making substance use treatment more relatable and understandable. And so when I would teach on the biological, psychological, and social model, I would say, what are some biological things that you experience in life? So, biology from my parents, biology from the fact that, my grandfather has this or my grandmother has this. Okay, what are the psychological components that kind of fold into your life? Well, I, have anxiety or I have depression or I am an overachiever or I plan too much or I'm a procrastinator. These things. Recently, I was talking to my spouse about how the astrological signs are really popping right now. So everybody is identifying and kind of going to their astrology. And so the psychological components of an addiction mirror that, if you will. Everyone says, oh, I do this, so this must be something that I have, or I resonate with this, so this must be something that I can claim or own. And then you have the social piece, which, depending on where you are in life, could be your friends, it could be your family, it could be the way things are displayed on TV or in social media. And so it takes all of those things in a pot to increase the likelihood of your development of an addiction. So socially, if you are always around substances and your parents had substance use issues or substance use disorders, and psychologically you have a predisposition to schizophrenia or something like that, then yes, I am going to be extremely concerned about you using cannabis because that chance is higher. So you go from, say, 30% of developing cannabis-induced psychosis to 70 because you're around it a lot, your parents had it, and you have that psychological predisposition. So it's really more of a range. And I think that I appreciate when the DSM-5 TR came out and really transformed substance use because it went from you have it or you don't to it's a spectrum. So if these things are impacting your life, then you're on the mild end. If there are more things impacting your life, you're on the moderate end. If there are all of these things that are causing you significant impairment are active, then you're on the more severe end. But it really opened the door to start the conversation around the fact that substance use is on a spectrum and just so risk is on a spectrum.
That is incredibly helpful to describe it that way. And I think opens it up for more people to be aware, either if they themselves are struggling or someone that they care about is struggling. You mentioned your work with adolescents before, and I'm curious, when would somebody know along that continuum if they should really stop and think about their substance use, or when it might be beneficial to speak with a professional or a loved one or a pastor about their substance use? What would be some indicators that, okay, this may be getting a little bit out of control?
To destigmatize substance use treatment, it should always be discussed. And I will say that the earlier someone is exposed to substances, the higher their risk. So that goes back to this social kind of component of the model that is influenced by the age at which you start engaging in substance use, because the fact that your brain isn't fully developed, because of the fact that the influences on your life are more salient for you at that stage of development. So I think at any given time, substance use should be discussed across the board, not to indicate there's a problem or an issue, but to recognize that people engage in substance use for a reason. And so that in and of itself starts to destigmatize the conversation, whether that be as a health psychologist talking about, again, the glucose and the A1C and how much sugar are you intaking? Do you have a nutritionist? What's your protein intake? What is your fiber intake? Similarly, what substances do you use? How often do you use Tylenol? Have you tried alcohol? How much alcohol do you use? Cannabis? Do you go on journeys with plant medicine? What do you do? Do you have soda? Do you have energy drinks all the time? Do you drink caffeine often? So I think the conversation should be happening across the board, regardless, as early as possible, regardless of if it's an experimentation or if it's considered a significant impairment. And I introduce a first of its kind framework in my book to understand substance use treatment and to treat from a culturally responsive lens, and is modeled after Dr. Janet E. Helm's work on identity development and Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin's work on family multi-systems and Bronfenbrenner's ecological framework and approach. And so it starts with lived identities, and then it goes into life stage, recovery lifestyle, and wraps with systemic impact. And so those four sectors all together paint a really, really comprehensive picture of the way in which a client relates to substances and exists within society as it relates to substances. And so when we talk about kind of life stage and we're talking about adolescence, there are usually some pretty clear indicators as to why an adolescent is using substances. And again, I'm trying to be intentional about using stigmatizing language because when I say clean, dirty, or problematic or unproblematic, it doesn't do anything for anyone. So it's healthy, unhealthy, productive, unproductive, these non-value laden words in and of itself are ways in which I work to destigmatize substance use treatment. And so when I talk about adolescents and substance use, in that stage of life, they're dealing with friend relationships, they're dealing with familial relationships, they are potentially having existential crises about life and questioning, especially now when we look at technology and we look at social media and we look at the fact that they've lived through a pandemic. Can't imagine that anyone is just using substances to explore. There's something, even if it's to keep myself awake, I drink coffee, or because I have a midday slump, I have a piece of candy. There's a reason and cause and effect. And so I think as providers, it's our job to identify what that cause and effect is, and that will help us understand and see if it is leading to more problematic behavior.
So you're sharing so much really important information here that I could ask you 50 questions about. I'm sitting here going like, I have a question about that, a question about that. And I imagine our listeners do as well. So it's so great that you have resources out there, including like your website and your book. And we'll make sure the links for all of that are in the description of this video so people can continue to learn and explore and maybe even reach out to you. So as we think about this, I'm really curious, knowing that we're surrounded by substances all the time and lots of different areas of the spectrum of what a substance is, what do you find are the realities about how people most benefit from like what kinds of treatment? So I'm mindful of like you hear people going to maybe a way to like a 30-day rehab or a center that is supposed to give them this safe space where they can process and learn healthy coping strategies. And then sometimes I've heard stories where people come home and they're back in that same environment and they're
Yeah.
seeing all the same sort of like conditioned things that like activate them to maybe go back to using.
Yep.
And I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts about what really people should or could consider to be helpful treatments?
I think there's this common misconception that if you take a person out of their environment, then they will be better. And in some cases, that is true. Sometimes you got to be able to get out of the environment in order to really get a leg up or an advantage on addressing your substance use or the addiction that you're dealing with. There is not a one size fits all. I think often when I say that, people misunderstand that to mean that AA doesn't work. And I'm going to just call it out. That is not at all what I'm saying. AA and anonymous meetings such as AA or NA or CA or fill in the blank anonymous are incredible resources. What I'm saying is they are not the only. And so treatment programs get stuck because that is their mode of treatment. And when it doesn't work for that person, the blame goes on that person rather than the system that is forcing an approach that doesn't work for them on them. Again, I'm going to go back to my CRUST framework because it identifies recovery lifestyle as a key component of treatment intervention. And it really just says, how can we as providers develop a lifestyle or assist our clients in developing a lifestyle that models the recovery that they want for themselves? And an example that I often use is family. So when you're dealing in the addiction world or in the substance use world, more often than not, family can be a component of why the unhealthy behavior is sustained. And the initial recommendation sometimes is to get away from the family. However, that is not always what the client wants. And if the client doesn't want that, and that's your only intervention, then you've lost the client and treatment is not going to succeed. There are areas in between that we can talk about. Does the family have a large group of children? Can you be the babysitter while everyone else is engaging in the substance use so that you're actually occupied focused and doing something that is still conducive to staying connected with your family in a healthy manner, what are the steps that we can take? How can we scaffold your treatment plan to remove the things that make you want to use or that contribute to your substance use while maintaining the lifestyle that you want to live, or while trying to get back to the identities that mean the most to you, whether that be parent or grandparent or best friend or partner or amazing musician, whatever the case, what are the lifestyles that you want to get back to? What are the identities that you want people to see and that you want to feel? And if we're able to prioritize those things in the work, in the treatment, then we would not be in a situation where people are going off to 30-day programs and coming back and then dying.
So important. And your emphasis on personalized treatment care and planning and interventions, it really makes me wonder how many people didn't get the care they needed because they were pigeonholed into you must do this is all we have to offer, or this is all your insurance will pay for. And maybe it didn't work or it wasn't feasible. And so then again, it's back on the client that says, well, you failed. You
Yeah.
didn't fit the square peg into the round hole, and therefore it's back on you. I also want to ask, you mentioned some phrasing and words that are definitely not helpful, that add to stigma, and I hear them all the time, unfortunately, still. And it made me think about when we're trying to help others to perhaps consider treatment or even just an evaluation, if that's what seems to be needed. I hear families say things like, well, just stop, just don't drink, just don't pick that up, just don't eat that chocolate. And that certainly isn't helpful. What would be some things that would be helpful for loved ones to both show support and then maybe assist if more care is wanted?
The responsibility should be on us as providers, not on the families and communities we serve. And so when we are talking with families or when we hear that from families, it's important to provide that psychoeducation around, well, if that were the case, then they'd probably stop by now. Or there are a lot of studies that show this is an increased risk for this particular person and they need support around it. And sometimes that support looks like you being abstinent for a while or you putting substances in a place that's not easily accessible. And oh my goodness, when I tell you, when I worked with my teens, the parents would, there are some times where parents really got frustrated when I would say, you have to stop drinking for a while. If you want your child to stop engaging in substance use, I need you to model that behavior. And I vividly remember one particular case, this father, he said, I have a glass of wine every night. That's what I do. That's part of dinner. That's part of my culture. There's nothing that you can tell me that will stop me from doing that. My child needs to stop using substances, and my child's not using alcohol, so it doesn't even matter. And my question is, okay, let's say that's the case. Let's say it doesn't matter because your child doesn't drink alcohol. Let's say that is something that you do culturally every night. What is harmful to you about stopping for a short period of time? I think part of it is creating a space where they can reflect on what is important to them, why it is that they want their family member or relative to stop engaging in the substance use. Chances are it's because they love them and they really want them around and they miss the person that they used to be. And so our job is really to help pull those stories out, remind them why they're here, and let them know that this is a non-linear process and it may look different for different people. And also, sometimes you have to set boundaries with a family member if it's gotten to a point where it is really, really detrimental to you as a family member, then that's where we kind of thrive as providers to start helping them figure out some healthy boundaries and also give resources that they can give and resources for them. Al-Anon is a great resource, and there are several other organizations that have supportive family recovery components that are peer support and very valuable.
From you sharing this, I can hear how complex and layered it is to work with families, to work with individuals who are dealing with substance use. And I really appreciate the thoughtful approach that you have to this. And the clinician themselves needs to be a good model, a good support, a good question asker to have people in every part of the dynamic, whether you're that person who's coming for treatment and you're the one dealing with the substance use, or anybody in your circle, to really reflect on what are the things that they might be doing that are contributing or even unintentionally like reinforcing this as some sort of behavior in this person's life. And it's really hard. It's hard for us to hear wake up calls or to change our own behavior. And as psychologists, we all know this, right? If I were to say, we all have to go run a marathon right now, like start, working toward that. And if you're not ready to hear it, you're not ready to do it, you're not like, I mean, it's behavior change is hard.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the compassion that you have in talking about this. I'm curious, what might be some cultural considerations that come to mind when you think about this topic?
That's a great question. And to be quite frank, I think we've been talking about cultural considerations the whole time. And I want to highlight that, especially given the climate that we're in. Just because we don't say certain things doesn't mean we're not talking about it. And I think that it's important to highlight that in the fact that we've been talking about it this whole time. And that is the core of my framework is it's called culturally responsive substance use treatment. And it really highlights the intentionality that's required when we are trying to be culturally responsive. And the way that I define cultural responsiveness is addressing the or adhering to the needs of the client as defined by the client rather than us just being the expert. So allowing the client tell us what it is that they need and not oversimplistically to your point. This is one of those we could go all day types of questions, but we've been talking about substance use in various ways from diagnosis, disorder, to treatment, to substance use itself. I think that when we're talking about cultural considerations, all that really means is recognizing that people who have substance use disorders are people first. And that goes to person first language, that goes to one size doesn't fit all, that goes to being intentional. And so those are the considerations. And within cultural responsiveness, I often talk about cultural humility and cultural awareness. And cultural humility is, you don't know what you don't know. And cultural awareness is there's more than one way to do a thing. So using those three things are how you get to cultural responsiveness in substance use treatment and recognizing and being okay with the fact that there's more than one way to get to a solution really and seeing people for who they are. I want to be seen as a Black woman. I don't want to be seen as an addict. Now, some people may say, I wear my addict badge proud, and that is absolutely their prerogative. But as a provider, I'm not going to call you an addict. I'm not going to call you that. I'm not taking away from your identity in how important that is to you. And I'm not going to perpetuate that because that is not how everybody feels about their substance use. And so people get really agitated. I've had some really heavy conversations about this type of consideration just on language alone. And well, why are you saying that we can't use it? I'm not saying that you can't use it. If that's how you identify, that's how you identify. What I am saying is it can be stigmatizing, and a lot of people do not want that label on themselves. You might, and that's fine. But as a provider, it's my job to be as supportive across the board as possible, whether that is allow you to use that term to identify yourself in our space or asking you to refrain from using it in group spaces because it doesn't serve everyone.
That is incredibly helpful. Again, you highlighting the importance of person-centered or client-centered first and foremost, and then also taking in the context of everything else going on to develop supportive interventions and treatments just for that particular person. And I think that's my takeaway from today. We mentioned that we could talk for hours about all that you do and all that you have to offer, including your book, which we will absolutely link. And that would be my takeaway, that your statement at the beginning, at the end, that one size does not fit all, and we have to treat everyone as individuals.
So my key takeaway is building off of all of this fantastic information that's been shared in this person-centered way, that if somebody's listening and you have somebody in your life who you think might be dealing with substance use and you want to be as supportive as you can and you don't know the perfect words, sometimes going into that conversation and asking questions to find out what is that person's language. So I'm hearing you say, Gabrielle, that you're like, this person probably has their own language about their experiences, and you might not need to try to find the perfect words, find out what their words are. And knowing that then you want to navigate spaces where there are many people and using the words in a way that feels safe for all. But if you're trying to connect with somebody in your life and to let them know that you want to support them, meet them where they're at. And I think that that is something that I definitely am taking away from this, that I hope our listeners are as well.
It is about understanding what the language the family member uses for themselves, but also that cultural humility and going in and saying, you know what? I don't know what this is for you. I don't know what this is like. I don't know what it does for you, but I am here for you. So it's a two-way street. It's that cultural humility, I don't know, and that cultural awareness. Okay, you say this, but you say this, and then you say this, and being okay with that. So the one key takeaway I would love the audience to take with them is it is our responsibility. It's our responsibility to help the people that we see suffering and being put to the side and ignored. It's our job to step in the gap, and it's not a bad thing to call some people in a supportive way.
Such really important, powerful information that you've shared today. And we are so appreciative. And just knowing that we could talk for probably like 5 more hours and pepper you with more questions, and you have so much wisdom to share. So we really want to reinforce that the listeners check out the resources that are in the description of this video to continue exploring this topic. So if this resonated with you today, please share this video with somebody that you care about. Also, you can listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And you can also message us on any of our social media links with questions that you'd like us to discuss in future episodes.